Operation Iron Oath. Date: June 14, 2016. Region: Western Mosul Corridor and Euphrates approaches, Iraq/Syria border area. Objective: conduct covert reconnaissance and prepare the joint strike to sever ISIS command and logistics nodes, degrade oil revenue streams, and enable the upcoming deliberate urban assault on Mosul and Raqqa. They came for midnight and for thunder. The first 15 seconds ripped open like a shot, rotor wash screaming across a dry riverbed, a column of dust eating the moonlight, and a single silhouette folding out of a Black Hawk's open hatch, call sign Razor, landing like a promise on the battered tarmac of an abandoned irrigation compound. Without fanfare, the operation began. Without mercy, the world around them sharpened. That violent opening was a stunt meant to capture the audience of fate, a small band of human beings chosen to walk straight into the dark and light a fuse. Part 1 of this story starts in the crucible where selection, supply, and the calculus of human will meet. It is a briefing, a preparation, and a first taste of the storm. The team assembled in the chalk-dry heat of a forward support base, 8 operators, 2 intelligence handlers, a drone pilot, and a linguist embedded as a cultural advisor. They were not a headline, they were fine tools honed to a deadly edge. Team roster, call signs / roles / brief backstory. Razor, Commander. Former Army SOF platoon leader, late 30s. Middle Eastern deployments, 2 combat tours. Calm as a ledger, possessed of a moral rhythm that favored measured risk. Father of a daughter who mailed him hand-drawn maps from school, maps he kept folded in a helmet pouch. Wraith, deputy/assault. Ex-gendarmerie operator, French GIGN seconded for coalition operations. Known for surgical entry, soft-spoken in French and Arabic. Carries a scar from a close-quarters room that once saved his life and cost him a friend. Fenrir, breacher/heavy. Scandinavian by birth but hardened in city fighting rotations overseas. Swears by a short 416 Hong Kong dollars and a brittle laugh. Former firefighter's son, chooses tools that break walls, not people. Lodestar, sniper/recon. Quiet, older than the rest, draws maps with coffee stains. Years as an army sniper followed by classified overseas deployments. Prefers long-range solutions and the cold geometry of ballistics. Messenger, radio/comms. Young, brilliant with waveforms, an ex-Signal Corps technician who sleeps like an encrypted file. He keeps every frequency in a small notebook with coffee-splattered margins. Phantom, electronic warfare/drone operator. Tech-native former contractor turned operator. Runs quadcopters by day, reads heat signatures and metadata by night. Hamlet, medic. Field surgeon temperament, quiet reassurance in a man who smells faintly of antiseptic and orange tobacco. Trained in tactical medicine, he carries a family photo tucked into his IFAK. Bastion, logistics/vehicle. Big, pragmatic, makes sure everyone eats and guns cycle. Ex-military truck driver turned armor specialist. Orient, linguist/cultural advisor. A scholar of local dialects and an old friend of Kurdish and Sunni contacts. Misplaced irony and sharp empathy, knows how to ask a question that opens a room. Gear manifest, selection highlights, described, not instructive. Rifles, a mix of 416 Hong Kong dollars and modified M4 platforms with aimpoint optics and suppressors for stealth tasks. Sidearms, Glock 19 variants with MOS plates for micro red dot sights. Optics, aimpoint micro T2, ACOG variants for designated marksman work, and handheld laser rangefinders for the sniper team. Night systems, and /PVS, 14 monoculars, helmet mounts, and thermal imagers for Overwatch teams. Radios, and /PRC, 148-bit and handheld encrypted systems for intra-team comms and link-to-air assets. Vehicles, up-armored Humvees for roof-mounted Overwatch, a discreet civilian support vehicle for low-profile movement. Miscellaneous, standard-issue body armor with SAPI plates, Cry-style modular load-bearing equipment, medkits, IFAKs, and a small kit of demolition and entry tools, intended for breaching infrastructure, not as a tutorial. Briefing, strategic frame. In the weeks before the insertion, the theater had been a map of fractures. ISIS held roads and oil fields, their revenue streams had been hammered, but their local power nodes still drew on tax extraction and extortion. Coalition imagery and human pointed to a half-dozen small compounds used as transit hubs for diesel convoys, cash transfers, and couriered communications. These nodes were not big, they were the connective tissue that kept an economy of occupation alive. Strategic intent was clear and surgical: strike the logistics, not just the fighters. Disrupt the oil axis, steal the signal, and allow conventional columns to punch the seams. The team's task was reconnaissance, tactical site exploitation, and covert beaconing for follow-on air and ground operations that would come weeks later. Risk calculus: the mission would not win battles in the headline sense. It would make history in the quiet arithmetic of denial, deprive the enemy of rebuildable infrastructure and deny them confidence. Success required surgical timing, absolute discipline, and the humility to accept that the human ledger of loss and survival would be uneven. Reconnaissance and preparation. For 4 days the operators rehearsed on a mock compound, working through sequences of movement and communication with austere choreography, silhouettes against portable floodlights, whispered hand signals, radio silence drills. Lodestar and Phantom ran target sets for the snipers and recon drones. Phantom's quadcopters fitted with thermal cameras sketched the local compound from 300 meters up, painting ghostly heat sigils on the team's tablet screens. Orient made quiet calls to an old source in a nearby market town. The source, an ex-merchant who lost a brother to ISIS levies, provided names, arrival patterns, and the cadence of night guards. He described how convoys parked at a low berm during midday to barter diesel for food, and how the compound's electricity was intermittently supplied by a battered generator near the eastern wall. These small human folds of information were worth more than satellite stills, they were rhythm. Phantom, in a truck that smelled of electronic glue, intercepted a handful of unencrypted administrative chatter from local networks, rudimentary but revealing. Messenger cross-referenced the chatter with aerial images. Standing on a low concrete embankment, with the horizon thin and copper, Razor watched the tablets and the maps and felt for the first time the peculiar weight of choice. They had permission to take risks, the unknown was a negotiable currency. The rehearsals were not just technical, each operator told a story about why they were there. In the white heat of prep, personal histories bioluminesced in the dark, Wraith spoke of a nephew lost to a homegrown extremist cell in Marseille, Fenrir shared a memory of a town burned by an IED, Lodestar quietly told them about an old spotter's steady hand that had once steadied his heart. The team's rehearsals included a silent approach across rubble-strewn fields, rapid override of a generator substation to deny power briefly to a compound, rendering cameras and lights blind for a narrow window, and a plan to place biometric and document collection kits in a safe compound for later exploitation by analysts. These were not manuals, they were intentions, policy-aligned activities designed to break revenue and information flows. Insertion timeline, conceptual. T-24 hours, final enablers checked. Phantom's drones staged. Air assets pre-briefed and placed on station for immediate response in case the insertion turned kinetic. T-6 hours, a low-profile convoy moved the team to the launch area. Local villagers noticed a fuel truck and shrugged. Life in the borderlands had become stubbornly used to odd things. T-90 minutes, last equipment checks. Hamlet ran through medkit evolutions, Messenger cycled batteries and swapped SIM stashes. Orient sat silent and read a local weather report translated into Kurdish and Sunni dialects. The operators ate a favorite gummy of dried fruit and hard cheese, the kind of ritual that held nerves at bay. T-5 minutes, Razor's face went blank easy. He clipped the map to his vest and looked, not at the lines on the tablet but at the faces of his team. We go in, we get what we came for, and we get the hell out for Phase 2. "Keep the eyes open and the mouths shut," he said, and the words fell into the practiced cadence of men who had accepted danger as a currency. The first insertion would be a probe, a hands-on feel of the enemy's posture. It would not last long, it would aim to leave chaos in the ledger and clues in the archive. If successful, the brief reconnaissance would be followed by strikes meant to crush the muscles of the convoy economy. A final note on psychology. Selection and training had written this team into a shared grammar of trust. The operators spoke a shorthand of minimalism: breathe, see, move. But beneath that ethos there lived very human burdens: sleep fractured by looping memory, the weight of comrades lost, the small, private rituals that kept them tethered. Hamlet checked the names on the casualty tags he carried in his med kit as if invoking kind spirits. Lodestar taped a frayed photograph of his old spotter under his scope mount. Fenrir whispered a joke to unstick the anxiety. They were, all of them, ordinary in the ways that counted, people who loved and feared and misremembered, and extraordinary in the ways that would be judged later, the little mercies they offered one another in the rain of action. End of Part 1. Part 1 sets the stage, the characters, the mission logic, the gear, and the reconnaissance plan. Part 2 will move into infiltration, the contact, the immediate tactical frictions that force decisions under fire, and the first tally of losses and intelligence gains. Operation Iron OATH, Part 2. Date, June 17, 2016. Region, outskirts of Mosul, Euphrates Corridor. Objective, infiltration and tactical disruption of ISIS logistics hub, collection of biometric and intelligence material for follow-on strikes. The night air was thick with dust and the sour tang of diesel. The team moved under a moon muted by high-altitude haze. At first it was silence, then the sound of boots on gravel, careful and steady. Razor led from the front, one hand raised, his silhouette ghostly through NVGs. Behind him, Wraith flowed like water, Fenrir's heavier frame absorbing the weight of a breaching kit. Lodestar had already found his perch, a low, broken minaret 600 meters to the east, scoped in and watching with the patience of a man who measured life in breath counts and trigger pressure. The compound ahead was alive in faint thermal outlines, guards smoking near a generator, a pair of trucks idling, barrels stacked like ribs against a concrete wall. Phantom's drone painted the tableau with infrared precision, the screen on Messenger's forearm flickering with moving signatures. Orient whispered a reminder: the men were not locals, but imported muscle. Their dialect was Levantine, not Iraqi. Outsiders, mercenaries of ideology. Insertion was clean. Bastion kept the vehicles staged 2 clicks out, engines cold. The operators pressed against the compound's outer wall, NVG green shapes melting into mud and shadow. Razor signaled, 3 fingers down. At 0, Fenrir surged forward, planting a small charge on the generator box. A hiss, a pop, and the compound fell into a shallow dark. Cameras dead, floodlights blind. Inside the wall was a different world. The team split, Wraith and Fenrir for the breach, Razor and Hamlet trailing, Phantom and Messenger anchoring the entry lane. In seconds, the first door was forced open. A pair of guards stumbled, confused by the blackout. 2 suppressed cracks answered, clean, efficient. No alarms, only silence, and then the shuffle of boots across tile. The room stank of sweat and cheap fuel. Piles of paperwork, cash bundles, and hard drives lay scattered. Messenger scooped up drives, pocketing them in anti-static sleeves. Phantom moved to rig a beacon, an IR marker invisible to the human eye but bright to the birds overhead. In orbit, coalition drones circled like patient predators, waiting for the mark. Lodestar called in soft over comms, movement. 2 vehicles approaching fast from the north. 6, maybe 8 heads. Technicals. Razor's jaw tightened. The mission was reconnaissance, not annihilation, but the calculus shifted. They had minutes before the patrol arrived. He ordered Messenger to push the beacon live, marking the compound for future strikes. Hamlet moved methodically, photographing biometric material, fingerprints on glass, ID cards tucked into wallets, a notebook scrawled with pay logs. Each detail was a nail in the coffin of ISIS logistics. The roar of engines neared. Phantom's drone feed showed dust plumes, headlights cutting the dark. Razor called it, exfil, now. The team flowed back through the breach, slipping into the dark as Lodestar covered their retreat. The first technical screeched to a halt outside the compound, gunner scanning with a mounted DSHK. A flashlight beam swept over the broken generator. Confusion reigned, no shots yet, but tension was brittle. Razor's convoy path was narrow, threading through farmland veins and mud canals. Bastion rolled forward with the Humvees, low beams cutting slivers of dirt track. The team boarded, breath ragged but controlled. Messenger glanced back at the compound, now alive with shouts and flashing muzzles. They were gone before the enemy understood. Minutes later, overhead thunder answered. Coalition aircraft locked onto Phantom's IR beacon. A pair of precision strikes turned the compound into a skeletal ruin, diesel flames clawing at the night, papers and barrels atomized. The patrol outside scattered, firing blindly at the sky. Inside the Humvee, silence was a heavier weight than noise. Each operator carried their own ghosts in the dark. Fenrir muttered about the clean breach. Hamlet checked his gloves, noting a smear of someone else's blood. Wraith remained wordless, eyes fixed forward, remembering Marseille. Razor folded his daughter's map tighter in his pouch, as though it could shield them all. Strategic after-action summary. Asterisk compound destroyed, logistics disrupted. Asterisk intelligence hall, biometric traces, pay logs, hard drives. Asterisk enemy response, local patrol engaged compound too late, minimal coalition exposure. Asterisk casualties, none. Asterisk psychological impact, operators noted heightened adrenaline crash, intrusive memories, minor stress injuries. Part 2 closes with tension unresolved, the mission technically a success, yet only the opening shot in a campaign that will demand blood. Part 3 will cover the escalation, full-scale urban operations in Mosul and Raqqa, contact with entrenched ISIS fighters, the cost paid in lives, and the dramatic climax of Iron Oath. Operation Iron OATH, Part 3. Date: July 21, 2017 to October 27, 2017. Region: Mosul, Iraq, and Raqqa, Syria, urban core operations. Objective: support and enable deliberate urban assaults to collapse ISIS territorial control, exploit intelligence to target leadership and remaining revenue networks, protect civilian populations where possible and preserve actionable evidence for prosecution. The war for cities is a patience of fists. It eats through time and breath, and it insists on small, terrible mathematics, house by house, street by street, human by human. Part 3 begins on the cracked pavements of Mosul where the air tasted of dust and burnt fabric, and it ends in the ash-smudged alleys of Raqqa. Between those bookends the team learned what the ledger asks of men when the price of victory is a long, ragged ledger of loss. The handoff from reconnaissance to heavy fight came sooner than any of them hoped. Coalition and Iraqi commands synchronized a multi-axis assault. Razor's team expanded into advisory roles, forward observers, coordinators for air-to-ground integration, and close advisors to Iraqi special units pushing through eastern Mosul. The city's skyline was a pricked silhouette, minarets reduced to stoves of rubble, apartment towers like open wounds. Tactically, Mosul was attrition sewn into three-dimensional traps. ISIS fought with the savagery of a cornered state, bides, booby-trapped apartments, tunneled bunkers, and fighters who wore civilian clothing as both shield and deception. The team's days stretched into a ritual of small violences: coordinate an airstrike to deny a held crossroads, advise a breach team into a choke point, call for medevac through a labyrinth of smashed vehicles. Lodestar's role grew into a cold geometry of loss prevention. From rooftop overwatches he calculated shot placement to pick out snipers and to protect advancing squads. One dawn he steadied on a balcony and took a measure, a marksman in a window 200 meters away, an ISIS sniper who had pinned down an Iraqi squad for hours. Lodestar talked only once into his radio: breath, aim, break at 2. The crack was a soft punctuation and the enemy's head slumped. A squad advanced. A life was saved. The quiet calculus had teeth. But calculus hardens at a cost. Urban fighting favored the defender. During a confrontation in a market district, Wraith moved to clear a collapsed storefront where civilians were sheltering. The doorway hit a pressure-triggered IED. The blast tore through wood and bone. Wraith's hands went still. The team's medic worked for an hour that smelled like iron and ozone. They lost him before the sun climbed. For a while the world narrowed to the shape of a body in the dust and the way the team rearranged itself around grief. Casualty care and psychological strain became persistent companions. Hamlet moved with the quiet rage of someone who stitched people back together while understanding that each stitch was a temporary defiance. He kept a list of names in the form of a prayer: Wraith, the nephew from Marseille, absent now in a different way. The mission pressed on. The world, indifferent, did not pause its obligations. In Mosul the coalition machinery achieved the necessary but costly attrition that bled ISIS manpower and morale. Airstrikes shattered command posts. Iraqi special forces reclaimed neighborhoods block by block. The city's liberation required a grinding patience, house-to-house clearance operations that took weeks, then months. Casualty figures climbed on both sides. The team lost friends and saw others hollowed by the strain of repeated exposure. Meanwhile, intelligence harvested from earlier raids, those biometric traces, hard drives, and pay logs, began to feed a darker surgery. Analysts pieced transactions to names and routes. The map of revenue flowed like a poison vein. The coalition struck again at oil trucks, at storage caches. It hit leaders identified by documents found in the ruined compound. The oil that once purchased power for the so-called caliphate now burned in ruinous columns. While Mosul bled, Raqqa was being strangled. The campaign there, Operation Wrath of the Euphrates, was the designer's test of siegecraft. U.S.-led SDF forces conducted encirclement, starving the city of resupply before moving in for the slow squeeze. The team split, with Phantom and Messenger embedding with Kurdish intelligence elements to hunt cells, to trace communications and to advise on the surgical targeting of critical compounds. The urban environment outside of Mosul and Raqqa also mattered: safe houses, escape routes, and the smoky hinterlands where fighters moved in small platoons. The team's role measured in a new currency: disruption at the seams, precise blows to movement and finance, and the capture of human evidence that would later form the skeleton of prosecutions. The climax of the campaign was not a single moment but a braided set of operations that converged in autumn 2017. Mosul fell in July after months of grinding. Raqqa declared liberated in October after crippling siege and street fighting that left much of the city a ruin. The technical metrics were enormous: thousands of ISIS fighters killed, tens of thousands of square kilometers reclaimed, oil revenues cut to shreds. The cost was not only numbers. The team watched neighborhoods emptied, families displaced. The images haunted them: children with inked palms, women with eyes suddenly older, a market stall frozen in the act of commerce. In a captured ISIS planning room the team found a mural of a man in robes and sunglasses. Children's drawings hung like a mockery to the idea of a caliphate. The secondary phase of the campaign shifted from territory to leadership hunting. Tidal Wave 2 strikes had gutted revenue. Now a transnational hunt sought the remnants of the organization. The team provided exploitation results, bank ledgers, courier routes, and safe house locations that fed JSOC and coalition targeting. In late 2018 and into 2019, the decapitation of leadership accelerated. High-value targets were neutralized or captured. That culmination reached a single, surgical apex in October 2019 with the raid on a compound in northwest Syria, an operation beyond the scope of Iron Oath yet made possible by the intelligence architecture the team had helped to build. 100 operators, a midnight insertion, and the final scene where a hunted leader detonated himself rather than be captured. The image was stark: a tunnel, a corpse, a flashbang of finality that rippled through the network. The self-detonation of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi closed a chapter, but it did not erase the scars. Aftermath and moral ledger. Operation Iron Oath, and the broader coalition effort, achieved a remarkable, if partial, victory: the collapse of ISIS as a territorial proto-state. The caliphate was reduced from a country-sized threat to dispersed cells and an ideology that still whispers in remote places. The immediate objectives: disruption of oil revenue, destruction of logistics nodes, liberation of population centers, were met. But the price was steep: cities in ruin, communities fractured, and a generation dawned in the shadow of violence. On a human level, the team returned changed. Some left for training billets and instruction, others rotated into advisory posts. A few took administrative orders and returned to lives that could never fully contain what they had seen. Hamlet remained with the unit for months, then left to work with NGOs in trauma care. Razor kept the girls' maps, still folded in his helmet pouch. They all carried small rituals: a cigarette in silence, a coin turned between fingers, a prayer murmured in a tent. Strategically, the war taught an old lesson in new clothes: when an insurgent force becomes a state, it creates vulnerabilities: taxation, infrastructure, roads, and depots that can be attacked. Air power, intelligence, and coordinated special operations are powerful counters. But occupying and rebuilding require political will and resources that often lag behind the battlefield's exigencies. The final hook. As Iron Oath closed its final after-action, the operators understood a truth that would not leave them: killing a leader and taking a city does not kill an idea. In the last lines of field notes, Lodestar scratched a small notation: "They'll remember the night. We'll remember the smell." It was both a promise and a worry. The final scene of this story is not triumphal. It is a quiet, unresolved epilogue: a dusty village outside Raqqa where a group of kids kicks a torn soccer ball past a burned pickup. One of them looks up, eyes bright and hungry, and laughs. The camera pulls back and leaves them to the wide horizon, the same horizon that had once made a map of empire and now held the fragile possibility of ordinary life. End of Part 3, Operation Iron Oath. Notes: this narrative draws on the structure of known coalition campaigns: Operation Inherent Resolve, Wrath of the Euphrates, and publicly available descriptions of special operations roles in urban combat, while dramatizing an original fictional team for narrative purposes. It omits operational specifics that would be inappropriate to include and focuses on human, strategic, and ethical dimensions of modern urban counterinsurgency.